Tonight I'm supposed to speak on the subject of new policies and old realities, and some of you may be wondering about the title. Well, there's no need to wonder. It doesn't mean anything at all. The reason I picked this title was because it was better than the one suggested by Alan Luxemburg, namely, What Happens Next? The trouble with that title is that it puts me into the realm of prophecy. And I remember well the Talmudic observation that after the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70 of the Common Era, prophecy was given over to children and fools. Well, as you can see, I'm no longer a child. So I decided, like Churchill, that I'd rather predict the past. But then my good friend Walter McDougall explained to me that the historians can't make up their minds either. So predicting the past has become quite as risky as predicting the future. Caught between future and past, what's a poor analyst to do? Now you know how we arrived at the title, New Policies and Old Realities. I'm going to divide this into three parts. First, I'll make some observations about American interests, namely the success of failure, as I put it. Then I'm going to look at three different challenges to those interests. One in Iraq, another one in the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations or relationship, and finally in Iran. And then in the last part of the speech, I'll make some observations about the new appointees and the direction that the administration might take based on what we know of what has been said, both by the President-elect and by some of the people that he has appointed. Let me begin with American interests. Since 1948, all administrations, whether they liked it or not, have settled more or less on three American interests in the Middle East. One has to do with access to oil at a tolerable price. Another has to do with the security of the State of Israel. And a third has to do with preventing the region from coming under the domination of a hostile power. Over the course of these 60-odd years, we've managed to move the oil question from one of access. Some of you may know that at different times there have been embargoes on oil coming out of the Middle East. We've managed to move the issue from one of access to one of price. Israel has moved from a very vulnerable state to quite a defensible one. And as far as the region being dominated by hostile powers, I don't think anyone today, if we had the choice, would prefer to go back to the era when we were competing with the Soviets compared to the dangers that now emanate from a place like Iran or even terrorists. And if you take the worst case, which is war, we've managed to move the situation from one that threatened a global confrontation to a regional confrontation to basically something that's local conflict. Now, we have not secured entirely access to oil at a reasonable price. The State of Israel still faces considerable dangers, and there are always people around who've come down with the bad idea that the Middle East belongs to them. Nonetheless, I would cite that although we have failed to reach all of those objectives, we have succeeded very well compared to our starting point back in the late 40s in meeting these three objectives. The reason I point all that out is because if you read the literature on American policy in the Middle East, it's very hypercritical, and you can reach several conclusions. One, the sky is falling down. Another, the sky will fall down tomorrow. And the last, it fell down yesterday, except that Washington is too stupid to understand it. Now, my proposition is that although we have failed to reach our ultimate goals in each of these three cases, we have come a very long ways and quite successfully. Let me turn now to the challenges to those interests as they have arisen over the last few years, and these are the challenges that are going to face the new administration in spades. I'll start with Iraq. I call my theme for this is the three negatives. We don't have to spend much time going over the circumstances under which we got into Iraq or the hopes for some kind of a democratic evolution that would be of such blinding success that the rest of the Middle East would see the light and become converted, as it were, to the American way of democracy. But the interest that we have now in Iraq can be stated very succinctly. We don't want it to become a place that is a base for an al-Qaeda-like terrorist operation, nor do we want it to become a wholly owned subsidiary of Iran. How can we achieve those? And this is where the three negatives come into play. I would argue that Iraq is a place that has a natural constitution, and it goes like this. The Shiites and the Kurds will not accept another Sunni dictatorship. The Sunnis and the Shiites will not accept an independent Kurdistan. And the Kurds and the Sunnis will not accept a Shiite Islamic Republic. Those are the three negatives. Anything that respects those three negatives I call a democracy in Iraq, because it does reflect, in my opinion, the view of the people as with respect to where their safety lies. If we can contrive that together, the main objective is to get the various groups to accommodate this and to understand that they cannot achieve what may be their most far-reaching objectives. The Sunnis to restore the dictatorship, the Shiites to create some kind of a Shiite republic, Islamic republic, or the Kurds to go independent. And that should have been our objective from the outset, but I think it is certainly our objective now. The military policy that we have employed to do this is called counterinsurgency, and although it seems to have mystified a lot of people, starting with the former Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, who wanted no parts of it, it is actually important to understand, and I think fairly easy to understand. Successful counterinsurgency consists of what I call the three C's: co-opt, corrupt, and coerce. You need a government, a coalition government in Iraq that in effect co-opts the major political figures, corrupts those who will be corrupted, and that's a considerable number, and therefore reduces the number who have to be coerced. Now, when you're working in counterinsurgency and that number of those who have to be coerced begins to drop, then you know that you're succeeding. And basically the surge, which was not properly named, was the application of counterinsurgency under General Petraeus, and it worked extremely well. We had to do a good deal of the co-option and the corruption because the current Iraqi government either did not know how to do this or was unwilling to do it. But by now, the success of this policy has been manifested. And although it is still a very delicate situation there, you can see how the application of counterinsurgency methods now has to be used in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, we relied on the government of Karzai and the Pakistani government to do the three, particularly the co-opt and the corrupt part of it, and basically they kept the money for themselves. We're going to have to get into the direct business of renting the tribes and other such people. Incidentally, nobody either in Iraq nor in Afghanistan can be bought. Nearly everybody can be rented, subject to change of terms or cancellation without notice. But still, that's the best that you can do, and with General Petraeus now in charge, basically, that's what we'll have to start doing in Afghanistan. But to come back to Iraq, therefore, the conclusion, or if you want to call it the reality, but the conclusion that we will face with Iraq is that the American military enterprise there is going to wind down. The question is whether that winding down is done on the basis of what's happening on the ground, or whether that's done because the new president has decided that it was a mistake to begin with, and that therefore the faster we get out, the better it will be. Nonetheless, whatever decision he takes, you can foresee the gradual and then swift withdrawal of most American military forces from there.